And then Terry, if you're out in Zoom land, I think Terry's done an amazing job putting these 4 artists together, and I'm really appreciative that she included me in this group of artists and sort of thought of me for this work. Because I think, it feels really great to sort of be in this show and be in dialogue with these other artists. And so I also feel very fortunate to be sharing with Tanika, Krista, and Christina. I think it's a really sort of dynamic combination of 4 artists who, seem very maybe different on the surface, but I think that through Terry's sort of curation, we brought together a really great show that I'm excited to be a part of. So thank you guys for coming. I want to sort of talk about the work that I have here, obviously. This is from a body of work titled In the Mist. And I think what's really interesting to me about this work, about this subculture, which is this airsoft, or like they sometimes call it milsim for military simulation. So it's basically like a live action version of like first person shooter video games. So like Fallout or Call of Duty, the rules and the mechanics kind of work in the same way. And I sort of stumbled upon this world as one does on the internet. And there was actually a discussion between like on a message board between, I assume, people who play this and active military personnel, because what part of this world is it's sort of recreating down to a very minute detail actual enlisted service members and special operation forces. And so not unlike cosplay or costume play or like Comic-Con, the people, some of the kids that I photographed in this are really into this hyper recreation of what it looks and feels like to be a special operations forces. And so what they sometimes were doing is they were using actual military patches and insignias, which I came to understand on this very intense message board, that is something that if you are not a service member or a veteran, that is very off limits. And so I was like, I gotta go see this thing. I gotta figure out where this is happening. And so I went in Northwest Indiana, Southern Wisconsin, and the suburbs of Chicago, and started finding these airsoft events. I think part of my interest in this as well is this hyper recreation. Most of my work deals with young people, particularly adolescents, and I'm really interested in the way that young people sort of outwardly sort of describe themselves to the world. I think photography is a medium that's about surface, and sometimes when you have something that has such an intense surface, photography feels like the correct and right vehicle to sort of like look at that and feel like that some sort of inner or psychological or emotional interest can sort of be manifested. So, I like this idea of photographing young people because I do think that young people are in transition, and when you sort of go to the lengths that my subjects have gone to sort of recreate this thing, it really, I think, says something about maybe not who you are forever, but who you are in that sort of time and space. And so previous work that I've done is I photograph young people in mosh pits or cheering at high school football games. I'm really interested in spectacle and an outward sort of outpouring of emotion. And so while I think some of these portraits are a little more static, I think the sort of costuming and presentation sort of projects into the world something that I find complicated interesting, sometimes menacing, but also sometimes really sort of sweet. Like this portrait here, to me, there's this real duality between this young person's sort of face, his softness. He is not a soldier, he is not hard, he is not sort of battle tested, but all of the sort of costuming and presentation to the world would sort of suggest otherwise. So yeah, I'm gonna go to my notes and see what else. And so, okay, so Terry, I think, rightly pointed out that this world and the airsoft games that I've been photographing are really different than a lot of my other work because of the presence of toy guns that look so real that they could be mistaken for real guns. And actually a lot of these guns, like this one in particular, a lot of these guns are actually licensed by firearm manufacturers, so to be like size and weight replicas. So a lot of these kids are holding an M4 that feels like an M4. Now, obviously, when you shoot these, they're just either battery powered or CO2 powered plastic BBs that are being shot out of these things. So it doesn't feel like shooting a real gun, but the sort of, you know, all the mechanics of carrying it around for 6 hours a day sort of feel real. And so I think that the presence of guns has really sort of supercharged this work, and I think adds a sort of level of, you know, I guess depending on your sort of point of view, a level of menace. But I think what's also really interesting to me about this work is the level of recreation and the level of detail going into that recreation also sort of feels like it exists in this fantasy realm for a lot of these young men. And again, my sort of selection, at least for this show, really focused on boys. I think there's a lot of different types of people who play this game, but I have a very specific interest in my work sort of over a larger period of time. And this sort of group of people felt the most representative of something that I could sort of speak to. I also want to sort of say this, like, I don't want this to be super austere. So if anybody wants to interject with a question, feel free to interject. It's sort of casual. It's great. We have, you know, we're not in this big auditorium. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask it. Question. Yeah, please.
The colored, is that gas? Do they use gas in these games?
So if you look, again, to me, what's so great about photography is it sees everything, whether I saw it there when I made the picture or not, the sort of record of it exists. And so this player is outfitted with all of these cold wire pull smoke grenades. Nice. So I was saying this earlier, like I asked one kid to like pull one out for me and like do it so I could photograph, and this kid was like, you know, that costs $6, right? And I was like, okay. So then I went and started buying a bunch of, I was like, what's the brand? I like took it home with me, ordered them on the internet. And so I will sometimes show up with these and I'll be like, I got smoke grenades. And then people will be like, oh, I want to get my picture made in the smoke grenade. So like these were smoke grenades that I had brought and then had them sort of pull. So they use it in like for cover. They're not using it for any sort of evacuation. Now at this event, there was a helicopter that you could pay an extra $5 and you could fly around in the helicopter and shoot people from. But there was no sort of like evac situation. It was just like, it looks cool when you throw the smoke grenade. And I guess there's different color smoke grenades and different sorts of things. So I wasn't allowed to use all of the colors on the field. But yeah, I sort of introduced these to the scenario because I will sort of show up and sort of watch the gameplay But, I'll ask someone, hey, can I photograph you guys running? Can you guys sort of run through the smoke? Or in the middle of the field, I'll sort of ask them, you have to sort of wear protective eyewear at all times. So the one where they're not wearing their goggles is sort of in between rounds, where I'm sort of making a more formal portrait. Thanks for that question. Yeah.
I think the kids said how much money they spend on this sport.
I don't
It
ask.
doesn't look cheap.
I think we now live in a world of hyper specialization where there's like the $500 level, it's $1,500 level and the $3,000 level. I'm sure, I know this gun, and if you look at it, it actually is like the sort of most plastic looking one. And if you again look at the pictures closely, you can sort of see that some are made of plastic and some are made of metal. But I'm sure, like anything, these things can start to cost upwards of $600-700. And then of course, you gotta do all the special modifications, because I think there's a part of this that's about the actual visual recreation, but then there's the sort of tactical and maneuvering and sort of being good at shooting your sort of fellow combatants and sort of doing maneuvers and moves in specific ways. But yeah, I can't imagine. And these tactical vests are this is like an actual tactical vest, because you don't necessarily buy a fake tactical vest, you just buy a tactical vest. You don't necessarily have a Kevlar insert like you would have if you were an actual service member, but like the walkie-talkies, those are real walkie-talkies. I actually, and it's not in this selection, but there was a whole bunch of kids who had throat contact mics so that they could whisper and they wouldn't sort of give away their position. So the microphones that they were using used the vibrations of their vocal cords. And I'm sure that maybe not the cheapest item either.
So what do the guys who are involved in this, what do you think about it? Seems like a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I think you hang out with your friends, you go camping for the weekend, you get to dress up and run around and shoot your friends. And I think that sort of my experience sort of growing up in the Midwestern suburbs or suburban areas. I grew up outside of Peoria, Illinois. We played paintball and nobody sort of had the exact look of this, but we would run around. I think as children, we sort of, played army and maybe even used sticks at some point. So I think that there is this sort of type of play that I think is ingrained in American sort of culture, that you run around with your friends and there's good guys and there's bad guys. I think that's a really great question, because I also sort of think for me, this sort of leads to sort of ideas of heroism and who is a good guy and how do good guys act, and this idea of being a good guy with a gun and being this sort of is that better, or sort of also thinking about like military personnel and service members, and sort of there's this line, because I think a lot of these young men also sort of aspire or sort of are really interested in military service. So I think they have a great time. For sure. I don't think anybody is being drugged to do this that doesn't want to play. Thanks for that question.
Really girls ever show up?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a group, it's not the majority of participants, but there was a group of players, and they were all sort of, I guess there's a special operations unit in England that's like the fighting corgis, because the Queen loves corgis. Also, the amount I've sort of found out about sort of global military operations, sort of from just listening to people explain to me their gear. So they all had fighting corgi patches. They were all wearing what British military would be wearing, and then all the way down to the British apparently use a different type of rifle, so they all have that specific type of rifle. So again, I think that there's this level of sort of recreation that is very intense and requires a lot of research. I mean, I would, and I think the video piece and the sort of video piece where I'm asking them to describe the plots of their favorite war films, and I leave out the question. But the amount of detail that they sort of can recreate in the video piece and sort of remember like everything that happened in Saving Private Ryan or Black Hawk Down or these really sort of popular military movies, I think go hand in hand with some of the missions and some of the gameplay that they're recreating.
If their parents are service.
I think that I wouldn't sort of be able to sort of talk about this group as a whole. I know that I have been in these spaces and I've seen kids playing with their dads. I know that there are sometimes moms who are waiting to sort of pick people up or will sort of stay all day. Sometimes fields, and most of these fields are actually like paintball fields. So most of the places that I'm going to are like sanctioned, cordoned off spaces. They're not sort of in someone's backyard, sort of running around. They're in these like very specific spaces. And again, I think what is a lot of them sort of talk about how important it is to sort of like treat these guns like real guns, and not sort of be running around their neighborhoods with them or sort of be shooting them outside of like spaces that they know that they can shoot these in. Because I do think that they look so real, and I think we also live in a world where, like candy bars are getting mistaken for handguns by certain people, and so I think like they're very aware of that. But I wouldn't sort of assume to sort of say that the person who is interested or plays this is one type of person from one type of background. Yeah, please.
So in your conversations with these boys,
Yeah.
young people, did any of them ever say that they had ever actually encountered a dead person, and not nice and clean at the funeral, but like crushed by farming, but a fly's calling them down and that?
I've never asked that question. There's, again, I think that to talk about actual human death doesn't really, it's not really, it's a really interesting point. It's not a conversation that I've had. It's again, because I think that there is this fantasy, and again, I think that also it sort of stems from very popular video games that they're sort of playing. I think there's a sort of understanding that they're kind of the same thing. Like, this is just like this video game, but sort of enacted in real space, running around with these things. So you're not on your couch. And I think, like, you can sort of see this patch. Like, this kid's patch says, "Fuck your couch," which is a reference to kids who only sit on the couch and play Call of Duty. That, like, you should, like, we're out here sort of doing this in real space. So, and I think that brings me to, like, maybe we can walk through some of these pictures. Like, I think for me, a lot of this sort of recreation, especially on this picture Aftermath, this boy has a sidearm. He has Spartan, like, come and take them, sort of Second Amendment sort of patches. So the Spartan helmet is like a really popular Second Amendment reference. And so he's got a patch on like that. And then he actually has zip tie restraints, which he would have no need for in the game. But to sort of recreate the look of a soldier, he has zip tie restraints because he's sort of trying to recreate that. Even down to, like, you'll sort of see, so this player is also wearing Mechanics brand gloves. And so that is what you'll see a lot of special operations forces wear this specific brand of glove, and they'll figure this out on the internet through photographs or there's actually even like social media or Instagram accounts with special operations forces where they will blur their faces out. And these guys on their Instagram, anytime that they post pictures of themselves on Instagram, they blur their faces out. So they look and sort of feel like how a special forces person would sort of post on social media. Whether that's an actual person's posting on social media or somebody else is posting for them, there's this sort of understanding that you blur out any of those people's faces. And so they on social media do this, which again, I think goes down this really amazing, confusing, and intense sort of recreating everything in this world. And so I think like things like this guy's night vision goggles, there's no reason to have night vision goggles during the day, except to sort of have them and sort of show all your friends that, oh, you've got night vision goggles, and that you've got this specific tactical vest, or, you've got a Camelback hydration unit. So just like in the military, like you're not carrying around a water bottle, so you can sort of stay hydrated. But again, then there's these breakdowns, and this is what I love. There's these breakdowns where this kid sort of, from a certain vantage point, is recreating the whole scenario, but then has like tennis shoes and white socks on because he maybe doesn't have this like the boots yet. Or the breakdowns, even like this kid is wearing jeans and black t-shirt, and he's wearing a Call of Duty t-shirt. So I really like that because it sort of references, the video game. But this kid had all of the gear all the way head to toe. And so I think, you can talk about how much this stuff costs. I think it's on this sort of sliding scale. Really all you need is the goggles and a gun to start playing, but you start to see like people get really, really into this, this recreation. So kind of one of the last things I wanted to sort of say, and then we can do more questions, or I can answer specific questions about pictures, is, for me, I think I'm really interested in youth because youth is, when you're young, everything feels so intense and so important. And I think there's a level of urgency that I sort of respond to. And I feel like these pictures are a collaboration in a way. I think they're doing all of this work to sort of be photographable, right? For them to sort of, recreate this thing. And then I think that I sort of talk to them and sort of discuss what I'm doing. And I think through my use of lighting or the smoke bombs or specific framing, I feel like I'm sort of collaborating to try and sort of uncover and talk about something that I think is messy and complicated and maybe socially unresolved. But I do feel like for me, one of my jobs as an artist is to sort of like ask the questions or to pose the questions. And, hopefully maybe start to have these larger debates around topics or sort of make you think about something in a different way. And I think whether you're sort of feel like looks really fun and really exciting, and or you're sort of terrified by some of this, or probably like most of us somewhere in between, I think to sort of be confronted or sort of understand that this is a world that exists, and that sort of my subjective sort of understanding or sort of grappling with this world is trying to just sort of like understand the bigger, larger, messier world altogether. So, and so again, I'm doing it through, all of these, I'm using an artificial light, so I'm using electronic flash to sort of really intensify things, or make the backgrounds darker than they maybe would have been. You can sort of see the catch light, again, the use of the smoke. And then, sometimes like in these pictures, just to sort of say this is a photograph that I made and then built out digitally to sort of replicate this digital like real physical space. So like, there's no tree that looks like this. This is like me taking photographic bits and then sort of recombining them, not unlike a game designer would sort of have to sort of build out the forest. And so I'm just trying to sort of look at this world and sort of kind of feel this intensity. And then I sort of also still deal with the sort of larger sort of issues that sort of it brings up. Yeah.
We have a question on Zoom.
Okay.
Can you talk about how the work is installed? There's an energy and rhythm to the placement of the photos on the wall.
And I'm hoping you're thinking that's a great thing. Yeah, I have a tendency to overhang things. And so I wanted, but I think it creates a certain dynamic, and I wanted you to sort of be enveloped in this room. I sort of had the architectural drawings and sort of had made some mock-ups. And I wanted you to be able to sort of move through the space and sort of maybe have to like realign and sort of come in and come out so that you had to sort of change your distance to the work. And also you would have to sort of look up and look down. I'm not trying to say that that's like searching through the forest for these kids, but maybe I am, I don't know. But I wanted there to be a sort of way that you had to sort of engage as a audience member with the work and not just do the like, 3 feet shuffle the whole way through and like look at the wall label. So I actually also put all the wall and text information in a different place than the work because I didn't want that to compete. Yes, please.
Talk about that.
Yeah, so this is a target range at one of the fields. There was this, and to be honest, it's pretty expensive. Like the day, like it's a $15 entrance fee for most of these places. They had this elaborate catwalk that you could go and then make sure that your weapon was firing correctly. Again, this is a paintball field, so a lot of this is paintball, but they had mannequins and cutouts sort of strung up along this catwalk. And then the sort of safety net behind it had sort of deteriorated. And so I wanted to have a couple pictures that felt like the environment. And I think that this one sort of specifically felt like a targeting situation, because they also have to like regulate how many feet per second these fire. So before they go into the field, there's like a maximum speed that these things can shoot at, so that you don't get hurt. Yeah. Does that answer? Yeah.
Somebody asked on Facebook, what is he printing on and what is your process?
I'm printing on, so these are inkjet prints printed on a like fiber burrito paper. Getting nerdy now, I love this. And then I actually, because I work digitally and I print digitally, I don't put glass in front of anything anymore for 2 reasons. I like the directness, and also like if somebody scratches it or sneezes on it, I'll just print a new one. And so I think that there's something sort of immediate to that. And I think it also allows the surface of the print to sort of be examined and not mediated through glass. In terms of process, that's the sort of technical process. The process of making the work is me spending all of my weekends hanging out in these spaces, which can be a little intense. I would maybe rather be like hanging out on the deck some days in the summer, but I go to these events and I try and make as many pictures as possible and try and figure out as much as I can. And then I go through a pretty intense editing process. I think I made maybe the first airsoft picture in like 2014 or 2015. So I'm really sort of editing, and I edited the work for this show based on conversations Terry and I were having about the other context of the show. And this specific space. So like I had mocked up this in the studio as soon as Terry was like, you're in the show. I was like, tell me what walls I'm on. I'm gonna need to sort of figure out how to sort of create this space.
I have a question.
Okay, please.
My question is, do these kids like love that you take their photos? Did they ask you for their photos?
Yeah, so I have a Google Drive
Gotcha.
repository. And what I've started to do is I just like, my business cards are just like for the people that I photograph at this point. I'm like, text me, email me, and I will send you the link to
Right.
the repository of all the pictures. So on my Google Drive that no one will ever see except for my subjects are basically the whole day's shoot. I just upload everything.
Right.
Because I want them to sort of have the pictures. I think also it allows, because I've actually photographed this guy like 4 or 5 different times. I think it actually sort of builds then a rapport that I'm not just sort of like swooping in and like click, 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 and like I'm gonna make you look a certain way, but that they can sort of have the pictures. And in all honesty, and I think this is actually where a lot of the complication of the work comes from, if they don't want to be photographed, they will tell me then and there. And I'm like, that is totally fine, I get it. But I mean, you work really hard to put this together, and someone like me comes along and says, like, I want to photograph this in very intense detail. I sometimes have lines of kids waiting to get their picture made. Because I do think that a lot of what some of this is performing or sort of showing off the stuff.
Right.
And I think that culturally, photography sometimes validates that, and then they can have those photographs for their Instagram, for whatever, and so they're excited about that. I don't know if that complicates the work or is not great, but I feel like the least I can do if somebody's going to give me their time to sort of work with me and do what I want to do, that I can sort of show them that. Most of these young men, though, are not seeing it in a gallery context. They're not interested. Or maybe they are interested in that. Again, I don't want to speak for everyone. But I do think that they certainly love the pictures when I send them. And now because no one emails, I have to like text message them all the pictures and the links to the Google Drives, which is great. Anybody else? Are there any other questions? Yeah, please.
Is there a degree of difficulty required to get accepted here? And if there is, what was your mindset? What should you be?
Oh, to me be accepted.
Be accepted in these groups.
I think the video, you can kind of see it a little bit more. There's sometimes 500 kids at these things. So I think that, and there's also other photographers who like photograph airsoft for this community, right? Like I don't see myself as photographing for this community. I'm photographing for another purpose. But I'm just another sort of photographer, another interested person. And so I also, and I think Terry alluded to this, and I think it really, there's a certain amount of privilege that I sort of embody and inhabit. Certainly as a white male, no one questions anything that I do in these spaces. I think that whether I'm accepted or not, I'm at the least tolerated. But I think in another way, and this is what Terry said, I sometimes am kind of invisible. Like I'm actually like the least exciting thing happening. And I think that's true for a lot of my work. I photographed in the South at high school football games, and people are like, oh, how do you get so close, and how do they not? I'm like, because if it's 4th down and 3, like me with a camera is like the most inconsequential thing. And I think like for this picture in particular, they're sort of performing this. I'm like, okay, here's the smoke bombs, let's run through, let's do this. But in pictures like this, it's kind of like a mad scramble. And I'm just sort of running around the woods with my orange vest on and my safety goggles. And nobody really pays attention to me. Now, I do, like early on, like I would contact the organizers and ask if I could come and things like that. But I kind of even stopped doing that because I would just show up and they're just like, yeah, great, got all this stuff. I think that's a really great question though.
How does the intensity of this compare? Have you ever gone to the Civil War reenactors? I think those are a rather fascinating subculture.
Yes, I have photographed at Civil War reenactments, but only in the North, which I think is a different vibe, actually. And the energy is so much lower because I think the Civil War reenactment, there's like a 25-minute, 30-minute skirmish at like 2:30. And other than that, you're sort of sitting around like stirring some beans and sort of talking and sort of telling you about how period accurate you are and what sort of regiment or, there's a lot of detail. Because this actually replicates the like first person online multiplayer shooter, there's a morning session and an afternoon session, and they're 4 hours long, and you get shot and you just go back to your respawn point and you keep going and you keep going and then you take a break. So, there's maybe like 100 kids like hanging out, like redoing their weapons or like cooking, but then there's like 200 kids on the field playing. So it just sort of depends on like, okay, do I feel like getting shot at in the next 30 minutes? I'll go photograph that. If not, I'll sort of walk around to the little camps or cars. I mean, the video has a lot of interviews with kids in their cars because they're all sort of driving up to the fields. There's just action all the time. And I think that the Civil War reenactments, at least my sort of perception of photographing those, it's just like, oh, tell me about reshoeing your horse for another 45 minutes. No offense, like it's just not the same. It's just not the same.
They're older crowd.
It's an older crowd, and I think also, and I think maybe this sort of goes to your question about being accepted. I think in a weird way, like I kind of accept them, and I think my sort of artistic superpower is empathy, and that might sound crazy, but I just am like, so tell me what's going on here, and I don't talk a whole lot, which sounds crazy and takes a lot of effort for, if you actually know me, for me to like actually not talk, but I try not to talk, and I think at some moment when somebody listens, especially I think young people, and I think this is true of like I was photographing in mosh pits for a long time earlier in my career. And I think that my subjects sort of see in me this sort of like version of the future. Like, oh, I want to do photography. I really like art. That's great. Oh, you're interested in this thing. And I think that there is this, like, I don't think my work is autobiographical 100%. But I do think that I recognize in them something that I understand and sort of was maybe a part of, and I think they sort of recognize in me maybe some sort of version of them in the future. Maybe not this crowd so much, but certainly other people I photograph. So I don't know, and I think I'm like actually listen, and I'm kind of legit in that way. And I think that allows me into a lot of spaces because I ask a lot of questions and try not to wait for and I do think that I don't talk a whole lot. I'm just like, tell me more. I mean, I was photographing a young man in Salina the other day, and I said, hey, can I take your picture? And he's like, no. But then he was like, well, yeah, if you photograph me in front of my car. And I think the next 45 minutes we were at his car, listening to it rev up, and him telling me why he works on cars and what he's gonna do next and how he's all the time and effort and all of these things that I think, like, you know, it's a real experience for me as an artist, and I think it's a real experience for them as someone in the world. So that was maybe a very long answer to that question, but
In speaking with these young people, do you ever get a feel of intensity that bothers you? That you see perhaps carrying into the future?
I mean, intensity is a word that for me is a positive thing. Because intensity belies a certain level of excitement or commitment or trying to sort of understand something. So if somebody's being really intense, that's what I'm here for. I'm here for that level of intensity. And I think my sort of, you know, with most of my subjects, I don't build these lifelong sort of camaraderies. I don't sort of follow up a lot. I sort of told somebody in my personal life, I'm not a good pen pal. Like, you're in my life when you're in my life. And like, if you come back into my life, it's great. But like, I don't necessarily do a whole lot of correspondence or follow up as part of my artistic practice. And so I guess what I'm interested in is like the moment that we're sort of intersecting and like the way that we're gonna try and make a picture together, or the way that, you know, they wanna sort of be seen, and I'm like, well, that's not maybe what I'm looking for, can we do this instead, and sort of try and figure out that, that sort of system. But as far as intensity goes, I want nothing but intensity, which can maybe be problematic for sure.
I meant their intensity for their picture.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
no, that's fine. Like, that was a classic artist question where like whatever you said, I just talked about what I wanted to talk about.
No matter.
We've all been to those artist questions. But at least the question wasn't a statement, so that was great. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
We have a question online.
Yeah,
How are you photographing here in Salina?
I'm walking out the front door. Salina actually has been an amazing place for me to photograph. I don't really feel like I'm a photographer who like wanders aimlessly to sort of see what can happen. I've been photographing in some of the parks. And I also know that for me, a lot of my subjects are going to be in parking lots, because what's the first thing you do when you get your driver's license? You get out of the driveway of your parents' house. And I think that there is this amazing sort of freedom or sort of thing that happens in the, like, you know, American suburbs, that you just gravitate towards these parking lots of parks or lookouts. And so I know that there will be people in those spaces. So I've been going to those spaces, and it's been great. But I do think that there's actually this really like generous and sort of openness to sort of me in Salina. Like, I got here on Monday night, and I think I had 2 or 3 good pictures the first, like, and it takes me like a week to make 2 or 3 good pictures. Okay, it takes me about 3 months to make 2 or 3 good pictures. And I think I made 2 or 3 genuinely good pictures in the first 3 hours I was here. So I don't know if that answers that question very well. I don't know about you guys, and I don't know about online, but that feels like a natural sort of point to sort of end it. I would like to thank everybody for tuning in and coming here. And again, thanks to the Salina Art Center for showing it. And thank you, Terry Evans, for including me in this program and stuff. Thanks, everyone.